Hello everyone, this is Bill Cline. I'm an extension specialist in the Department of Entomology and Plant Pathology at North Carolina State University. I'm also the extension horticulturist for blueberries. This session will cover blueberry cultivars for the southeastern U.S. Before we talk about cultivars, I'd like to give a little background on blueberries. The species of blueberry is Vaccinium. They're in the heath family or the Ericaceae. Blueberries are native to North America. They're related to azaleas, rhododendrons, cranberries. They're acid-loving plants that require a low soil pH. When you look at a blueberry bush, it's a multi-trunked plant. It's not a single trunk like a tree. You'd like to see all different ages of wood coming out of the ground. They're deciduous, so they drop their leaves in the wintertime, and it's a woody plant and a perennial that lasts many years. They require winter chilling. They're a temperate plant that has to have a certain amount of cold weather in the winter in order to leaf and flower normally in the spring. Blueberries are pollinated by insects. Most cultivars will not produce much, if any, fruit unless an insect visits the flower. They're typically hand harvested. We're seeing a trend toward more machine harvest. Most of the cultivated blueberries are sold fresh, but there's also quite a lot that is processed, mostly frozen. If we take a look at the blueberry bush and concentrate on the twigs where the fruit is born, if you look at the bushes in wintertime, the flower buds that will bloom and produce fruit are quite obvious in the wintertime. The nice fat buds out on the ends of the twigs. And those will bloom, produce flowers. They're pollinated by insects, and then that is where the berries will be produced that summer. If you follow through to the fall of the year, the vegetative shoots that were produced during the summer, during harvest and after harvest, form flower buds in the leaf axils. So if you look at this image with the fall color in the lower right-hand corner, you can see flower buds forming in the axils of those leaves. And of course, when the leaves fall off, what will remain will be the terminal flower buds for the coming season's crop. Just a little bit about culture and management for blueberries. Pollination is essential. You have to have an insect visit each flower or you won't have a berry form. So that's a really critical step in producing the crop. For cross-pollination, it's best to plant more than one cultivar. Most blueberries are partially self-infertile, so having a mix of cultivars will produce more fruit, larger fruit, more seeds in the berries, so you'll just get a better fruit set with cross-pollination. Other practices, pruning is an annual task, usually in the dormant season. You remove the old and weak canes, shape the bush, thin the crop. Most blueberries will overbear if not pruned. In most situations, irrigation is essential, especially during establishment for blueberries. So irrigation both for drought relief, we see a lot of drip irrigation systems and micro sprinklers, and also for freeze protection. There are a fair amount of systems in North Carolina with overhead irrigation for freeze protection. As far as fertility and organic matter, the best advice I can give you on fertilizer use is to base it on your soil testing. A lot of sites in North Carolina typically will only need nitrogen. Phosphorus and potassium may be sufficient. One key thing, you need to maintain a low pH for the life of the planting. So around 4.5 is ideal. I see sites that range anywhere from 3.9 to 5.3 where the bushes are doing okay. So that's sort of the range we have to work with, but your target pH is low. Most sites outside of native blueberry soils require amendment, and this is usually pine bark amendment in the soil or aged sawdust, again mixed in with the soil prior to planting. And just an image here of the blueberry flowers and one of the pollinating insects. This is the southeastern blueberry bee. It's a small bumblebee-like insect. And again, blueberries have to be visited by an insect, blueberry flowers, in order to form a berry. So this is a critical step. If pollination is not done, what you will see is berries that do not size. So what we're looking at here is a cluster of fruit where some berries were pollinated and others were not. The small berries that are sort of red-faced will not size. They were not pollinated, so they will fall off 2 to 3 weeks after bloom. And this is a common phone call from growers after bloom, where the berries are falling off, and the ones that are dropping are simply the ones that were not pollinated. Blueberry pruning is something that's done every winter. There's also some options for summer pruning in the southeastern U.S. We'll talk at length about blueberry pruning in another session here. There's just a couple of images to share with you to show sort of a before and after pruning scheme. You narrow the base of the bush and thin the canes, open up the center of the plant, and reduce the crop load. A very critical step, has to be done every winter to keep the bushes in top shape. Overhead irrigation is quite common for freeze protection in the spring. This is a fairly high volume system with sprinklers about 12 to the acre that are capable of keeping the blooms and emerging flowers wet during a freeze event in the spring. If you keep them wet throughout a freeze event, form ice and continually form ice until it melts the next day, then you can protect the crop. So that's the idea behind overhead for freeze protection. Another really common system is a drip irrigation system, and this is frequently used in areas where water needs to be conserved, maybe irrigating from a well and don't have a lot of water volume, so drip systems have been used quite successfully as well. Many of the commercial blueberry growers that I work with are in southeastern North Carolina, Bladen and surrounding counties, and they have blueberry soils that are native blueberry soils. They have characteristics that allow them to produce blueberries without having to add organic matter or without having to add irrigation. So these fields have high organic matter content. They're sand-based and have sort of a salt and pepper appearance, no brown color in the soil. So in these fields, the rows are bedded up to keep the roots out of the water, because the water table is within 12 to 24 inches of the surface year-round. So really unique native blueberry sites that produce blueberries quite well. On upland sites where the humic matter in the soil may be low and the water table is quite far away, the site has to be modified. And this is a really common tactic in a lot of parts of the southeast, especially some of the smaller plantings that have to amend the site. You see this a lot with pick your own operations and 1, 2 to 3 acre plantings just throughout the southeast. So on these upland sites, typically add pine bark or peat moss, but I see more pine bark than anything else added to the soil and mixed in as an organic substrate for the blueberries. It's got a pH of around 4.5, helps with the drainage, and at least on flat sites, as you see here in this picture, really try to keep them on as much of a raised bed as possible. To me, evaluating sites, you know that it involves a set of post hole diggers. I think it's really valuable when you evaluate a site for a grower trying to determine whether it's a good blueberry site to go out and do some digging. You can see what the soil profile is, how well drained the site is, and also find out if there are any restrictive layers or anything that would cause a problem for the blueberries down the road. So site evaluation, I think, is a critical step. On most upland sites where there are not native blueberry soils, this is what the end result looks like. You very often have to amend beds with pine bark, grow the bushes on raised beds, and then mulch the surface, and often with sod in the middles, grass middles. And this system works quite well and mimics that native characteristic of a well-drained, high organic site. In discussing blueberry cultivars, we first have to back up and discuss species. Within each species, there are cultivars that are suited for different areas. And of the species that are cultivated, the ones we can grow in the southeastern U.S., depending on your location, include rabbit eye, high bush, southern high bush and some of the newer pentaploid cultivars. Rabbit eyes are Vaccinium virgatum. They're native to the deep south. If you think about Alabama, North Florida, that region, high bush are quite different. They're Vaccinium corymbosum. It's also called northern high bush. They were originally domesticated in New Jersey, but also native down into the south. We see them in the wild in North Carolina. The third type, southern high bush, is a complex hybrid. So it's Vaccinium corymbosum crossed with a lot of other species. And so this interspecific hybrid has a lower chill requirement, greater soil adaptability, a lot of good characteristics from the different species that are involved. And just a brief mention of the pentaploids. There are not a lot of them out there. One that comes to mind is Robison. It's a pentaploid released by NC State University. These are hybrids between rabbit eye and high bush, and have characteristics such as ripening season that are sort of in between the two. Blueberry cultivar selection is really driven by your location. The things you have to take into consideration, in addition to the soil type and the percent humic matter that we've talked about, are things like chill hours. This is the hours below 45 degrees that are required by that species or cultivar in order to leaf and flower normally. So chill hours occur in North Carolina from October to February, and we keep pretty close tabs on that because it helps us to understand why some cultivars do well in our area and some don't. Another driver of cultivar selection is the USDA hardiness zone, and with some cultivars being well adapted to warmer climates and some to colder. If you look at the chill requirements of the various blueberry species, you can see that they have a chill hour range that sort of corresponds to the USDA hardiness zone, but there's also a lot of variation within species. So for instance, high bush cultivars may require as little as 800 hours of chilling in the winter to well over 1200. Rabbit eyes tend to be in the 400 to 800 range. The southern high bush are the most widely variable, from almost no chill to some cultivars that require as much as 900 hours of chilling. And those correspond to the USDA hardiness zones, with high bush being the most hardy, rabbit eye sort of intermediate, and southern high bush intermediate down to even out to zone 10. If we correlate that to the plant hardiness zone map, and it's color coded, you can see that the high bush for zone 3 down to 7, high bush blueberries would be, there would be cultivars available all the way from Canada down into western North Carolina, northern Alabama. So the range of high bush is quite broad, and they're quite cold hardy. If you look at the rabbit eyes, they would be more in the 7 and 8 range. So this would be, if you look at North Carolina, most of the Piedmont and coastal plain, most of South Carolina, most of Georgia, and so forth. So the 7 to 8 range on the chill map is the light green to tan color. And then finally, the southern high bush, which would be plant hardiness zone 7 down to 10, would go from most of North Carolina down through the southeast and on down into the Florida peninsula. So if we look at North Carolina as an example, when I'm making cultivar recommendations for our state, the high bush cultivars are preferred for the North Carolina mountains, and the elevation I use is about 2,500 feet, because that seems to correlate with the cold temperatures that are just too low in the midwinter temperatures for rabbit eye blueberry. Once you get below 2,500 feet, rabbit eyes will do quite well in the lower mountains, foothills, Piedmont, and the drier areas of the coastal plain. And the strength of the rabbit eyes is their soil adaptability and drought tolerance. They're just a really tough bush. And then finally, the southern high bush and some selected low chill high bush are mostly what is grown in our main coastal production areas. And the key to the cultivar selection there is that we're trying to get early ripening. So really striving to have the early crop in that part of the state. Once you decide what species of blueberry to grow, I encourage you to research your choices. Talk to folks about the varieties that you're looking at. Very often folks will say, I wouldn't grow that one because of various reasons. Some varieties tend towards stemminess, fruit cracking during wet weather. Some of the older cultivars are just quite soft, or they may have a wet stem scar. So we'll talk later in this session about specific cultivars that I would recommend, but also encourage you to do your own homework on this, and you may encounter cultivars that are locally popular that are not the ones that I recommend. So there's a lot of blueberries out there, and a lot of good information on those cultivars. So I encourage you to look into it and make good choices. One characteristic that will disqualify a cultivar from commercial production can be as simple as fruit color. We have a comparison here: Onslow, the rabbit eye blueberry on the left in this image, versus Columbus on the right. There's a tremendous difference in the waxy bloom, the wax coating on the berries that is natural, that is an indicator of quality. And so the light blue color is desirable, the dark blue is not, and that alone can disqualify a cultivar, even though all other characteristics are good. One thing that's been extremely valuable to us in North Carolina has been the local testing and evaluation of cultivars. We're sort of midway on the East Coast, so we can use some cultivars from the north, from New Jersey. We can use some of the Florida cultivars have transplanted north and grown quite well for us. But the only way to really find out is to try them. This is a picture of Mike Mainland. He's an emeritus professor of horticultural science at NC State and a famous blueberry fellow worldwide. And Mike is retired, but still comes in and still works with blueberries and harvests every year, and just invaluable amount of research and cultivar evaluation has come out of his program. If you look at the field that Mike is standing in, you can see bushes that are still dormant and some that are leafed out. So these are characteristics that are occurring because of their chill requirements. So the low chill varieties are leafing and blooming and producing fruit already. The high chill cultivars that may not be suitable for North Carolina are still dormant. They still haven't broken dormancy and haven't started to come out. If we look at blueberry harvest timing by cultivar in southeastern North Carolina, you can see how our program is weighted. Our industry is heavily invested in southern high bush. The green color on the chart shows our major cultivars and the time that they ripen. Just a couple of high bush cultivars are in use in that southeastern part of North Carolina. So Duke and the old heirloom variety Croatan is still around. Also, I'd like you to notice the cultivars in red. This is the transition to rabbit eye blueberries, and notice the time of year that they ripen. So the rabbit eyes ripen quite a bit later than the high bush or southern high bush, and rabbit eye ripening being from mid-June through August. So our season, as you can see, is really heavily weighted towards the higher value early fruit. So we have lots of cultivars in that early season window. I promised we would get down to specifics of cultivars, and we've reached that point. So I'll take a look at high bush cultivars first. So these would be for zones 3 to 7, well-drained, amended soils with irrigation. And again, high bush are the most cold tolerant. So at higher elevations in North Carolina, these are the only cultivars that can be grown. So our old standards, if you go to the old plantings up in the mountains of North Carolina, you'll see cultivars like Early Blue, Blue Crop, Jersey. Some of the newer ones that I like are Duke, which has performed quite well for us, Aurora, Liberty, and Draper. Rabbit eye cultivars, zones 7 to 8, are really the mainstay of our small pick your own operations in the south. So These are what you're most likely to see in backyard plantings or pick your own plantings in the southeast. They're mostly irrigated, or at least initially irrigated, mostly amended and on upland sites. The old standard cultivars are Premier and Climax are a couple of the earliest. Brightwell's a little bit newer. Tiff Blue is a really common rabbit eye that you see in plantings, and Tiff Blue tends to sprout a lot, so it gets transplanted. People dig the shoots and move it around. So if someone got a blueberry plant from their neighbor, chances are it's the old Georgia cultivar Tiff Blue. Powder Blue is an older NC State release. Some of the newer cultivars that I like, Vernon is quite attractive fruit. It will split in rainy weather, but I like the cultivar nonetheless. Kruger is a really new cultivar that I don't know a whole lot about, but it's large fruited and quite attractive and flavorful. Alapaha is a cultivar that's seeing a lot of machine harvest for fresh in Georgia. We haven't got that much of it in North Carolina. Columbus is a NC State release, and really, I think the highest quality rabbit eye cultivar out there in terms of fruit quality. Ira, O'Clockney, Onslow are all later ripening, newer cultivars, again, all suitable for production. The final category of cultivars I'd like to mention is the southern highbush cultivars, zones 7 to 10. So they're grown from the coastal plain all the way down into subtropical zones. They're optimal on native sites, but they can be grown on well-drained, irrigated, amended uplands. They are not nearly as vigorous as the rabbit eyes. So where I see both rabbit eyes and southern highbush planted together, the rabbit eyes tend to survive and do quite well. The southern highbush, depending on care and on site preparation, may or may not survive. So I'll just be cautious about trying southern highbush cultivars on sites that are better suited for rabbit eyes. But some of the standard cultivars, more or less in order of ripening there, O'Neill, Star, New Hanover, and Legacy. Newer cultivars, Rebel, Susie Blue, Farthing, Camellia, Gupton. Legacy is one that I think is probably underutilized. It has quite broad adaptation to sites and to chilling. I think will go fairly far south, and quite nice fruit. And I think it's one that in North Carolina we see grown from the coastal plain through amended sites in the Piedmont and all the way up to I've seen it grown near Boone, North Carolina, so really quite far up in the mountains. So Legacy, one to consider for sure. For the final slide, I want to include one more that I think may be an overlooked cultivar. Gupton was a release from the USDA at Poplarville, Mississippi. It's a southern highbush. You can see there 80% ripe on the 18th of June in coastal North Carolina. What was interesting about this picture is that this was the first time this bush was picked. So we let the whole bush blew up, really. 80% ripe means it wasn't picked the first time or the second time. So we waited until a lot of the fruit was ripe, and yet the quality was still quite good. So it's one that hangs well on the bush, and I think is an overlooked candidate for southern highbush production. I think the reason it got overlooked is that it is late compared to some of the cultivars we typically pursue and the season we typically pursue. So with that, I'd be glad to answer any questions, and thank you for your attention.